The elevator in Liam Carter's building had been broken for 11 days. He knew this the way he knew everything about the place he'd lived for 4 years, not because anyone had told him, but because he'd walked past the handwritten sign taped to the doors every morning since the Tuesday it stopped working. Out of service. Management notified. The tape had yellowed at the corners. Management, apparently, had other priorities. He took the stairs. 6 flights. His boots left wet prints on each concrete step, the snow melting off in slow drips as he climbed. Outside, the storm had buried Chicago in white silence. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, it was the silence of a city holding its breath, waiting for something to break. He'd worked 12 hours. His shoulders ached. His right knee had been giving him trouble since October, and the cold made it worse. He carried a paper bag with a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store 2 blocks over, the warmth of it coming through the paper and into his palm, which was the best thing that had happened to him all day. He heard her before he saw her, not crying. Nothing so obvious as that. It was a sound more like controlled, exhaling the sound of someone who had decided not to make noise, but whose body was not fully cooperating. She was sitting on the floor of the hallway outside Unit 6C, not slumped. Sitting straight-backed against the wall, her knees together, her coat gray wool, expensive, he noticed even then pulled tight around her. 2 suitcases stood beside her, both large, both the kind with hard shells and discreet logos that cost more than a month of his rent. A laptop bag. A smaller overnight case, all of it arranged neatly, which somehow made it worse. Snow still sat on her shoulders. In her hair, she hadn't brushed it off. Liam stopped at the top of the stairs. She looked up. Her eyes were dark and dry, and absolutely furious not at him, specifically, but at the entire situation in general, and he happened to be part of it now. Her jaw was tight. She was cold. She was trying very hard not to show any of it. "I'm not a problem," she said. Her voice was controlled. A voice trained for boardrooms. "I'm waiting for someone." Liam looked at the suitcases. At the unit number. He'd seen Mrs. Hartwell in 6C twice, briefly, in the elevator before it broke a woman in her 60s who wore house dresses and smelled like lavender. He did not think these suitcases belonged to Mrs. Hartwell. "It's -11 out," he said, "and the hallway's not much better." "I'm aware." He shifted the grocery bag. "The chicken's getting cold." "I don't want your chicken. I was talking about mine." He looked at her for a moment. She looked back, jaw still tight, chin lifted a fraction. 6C is occupied by a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Hartwell. Has been for 8 years. So whoever you're waiting for either doesn't live there or hasn't been honest with you. Something moved across her face, fast. She controlled it immediately, and the controlled face came back. "That," she said quietly, "is consistent with recent events." He nodded. He looked at his door 6A across the hall. He looked at the woman on the floor. He thought about his daughter, asleep inside, watched by the neighbor's teenager who came over on late nights for $20 and whatever snacks she could find. He thought about all the reasons this was a poor idea. "If you don't have anywhere to go," he said, "you can stay with me." She looked at him the way people look at something they haven't categorized yet. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed. "But you know Mrs. Hartwell isn't opening that door, and there's not a cab in the city moving tonight with this storm." He reached into his coat pocket, found his keys. "I have a couch. It's not much, but it's warm." She didn't answer right away. He could see her running calculations, the kind of calculations that had probably served her very well for a long time, in rooms full of people much sharper and better dressed than him. Outside, somewhere below, the wind hit the building in a long, low note. She stood up. She didn't ask for help with the suitcases. She didn't thank him. She just stood, picked up the overnight bag and the laptop case, and waited. He carried the suitcases. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. He unlocked 6A, pushed the door open, and the warmth spilled out into the hallway like it had been waiting for them. The apartment was small. Isabella Laurent, because that was who she was, though she had not yet said so, had lived in a penthouse on the 43rd floor for 6 years. Before that, a brownstone in Lincoln Park. Before that, a suite at the Langham during a period of transition she preferred not to think about. She understood intellectually that most people in Chicago did not live the way she lived. Understanding it and standing inside it were different things. The living room could fit in her walk-in closet. The kitchen was visible from the front door, 4 steps, and you were in it. The furniture was mismatched but cared for. A couch with a blue throw blanket folded over one arm. A coffee table with a library book and a coloring page on it, half finished, the crayon lines careful inside the borders. A small television. Bookshelves made from boards and cinder blocks, filled to capacity. Warm, though. Genuinely warm. The radiator ticked against the wall, and the air smelled like someone had been cooking earlier garlic. Maybe. And something sweet. "You can put your coat on the hook," the man said. "I'll set up the couch." He hadn't told her his name either. He disappeared down a short hallway. She heard a door open quietly, heard soft voices, a child's voice, then a teenage voice, then his, low and careful. A minute later, he came back out with a girl behind him. 7 years old, maybe 8. Brown hair in 2 uneven braids, pajamas with rabbits on them, feet bare on the linoleum. The girl looked at Isabella with the frank, unguarded interest only children can manage. "Who is she?" the girl asked. "A neighbor," the man said. "She's going to stay on the couch tonight. Storm's too bad to go out. Does she want hot chocolate?" He looked at Isabella. Isabella had not had hot chocolate in approximately 15 years. She had opinions about sugar content and cortisol, and the importance of sleep hygiene. She opened her mouth. "Yes," she said. "That would be yes." The girl nodded seriously and went to the kitchen. The man watched Isabella for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not suspicious, not impressed. Just attentive, like he was noting something. "Liam," he said, and offered his hand. "Isabella." They shook. His hand was calloused and very warm. He cleared the coffee table to give her space, moved a pile of mail, found an extra pillow in the hall closet. Everything he did was quiet, efficient, with the particular economy of someone accustomed to doing a great deal in a small space. He didn't narrate any of it. He didn't apologize for the apartment. That, more than anything, was what she noticed. Every man she'd had in her home for the past 10 years had either been trying to impress her or trying to manage her. They filled space with words. They explained things. Liam Carter cleared a coffee table and got a pillow and heated up the rotisserie chicken and didn't explain himself at all. The girl came back with 2 mugs of hot chocolate, both crowned with an impressive quantity of mini marshmallows. She handed one to Isabella with both hands. "I'm Sophie," she said. "Isabella. That's a long name." "It is. I have a fish named Bubbles," Sophie offered. "He's very good. I'm sure he is." Sophie seemed satisfied with this. She climbed onto the couch beside her father, tucked herself under his arm, and watched Isabella the way children watch things they find interesting openly, without strategy. Isabella sat in the armchair. She held the warm mug. She looked at the coloring page on the table, the careful lines staying inside the borders, the deliberate choice of color, a green horse, a purple sky. She thought about her own apartment. The penthouse on Wacker, which she had furnished with the help of an interior designer whose entire practice was built around the word curated. White marble, clean lines, an art piece on the wall that had cost $40,000 and that she could not have described in any detail from memory. Everything in its correct position and none of it left anywhere. Because she lived alone, and there was no one to leave things. There were no coloring pages in her penthouse. There was no fish named Bubbles. There was, she realized, sitting in a mismatched armchair with marshmallows on her lip, Very little evidence in her apartment that a person actually lived there, as opposed to using it as a base of operations between more important places. It had been a very long day. It had been, she thought, a very long several years. She drank the hot chocolate. It was too sweet and too hot, and the marshmallows stuck to her upper lip. She drank all of it. Sophie went to bed at 9:30. Liam was gone for 20 minutes. Putting her down, she could hear the low cadence of his voice through the wall. A story about something, the words indistinct. Then, quiet. Then, him reappearing, pulling the hallway door mostly shut behind him. He sat in the armchair she had vacated and stretched his legs out with the careful movement of someone whose body had been working hard for a long time. The radiator ticked. Outside, the wind came in waves. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. "But if you're hungry, I've got chicken." She was, it turned out, extremely hungry. She hadn't eaten since a 7:30 meeting that morning, which now felt like something that had happened to a different person, in a different life. He made 2 plates. She sat at the kitchen table, which was barely big enough for 2 people, and ate cold rotisserie chicken and grocery store rolls and a salad that he apologized for, saying the dressing was the only kind Sophie would tolerate. "It's fine," Isabella said. It was, in fact, fine. "The penthouse on Wacker," he said, not looking at her. 43rd floor. She set down her fork. "I recognize the suitcases," he said. "My company handles logistics contracts for a lot of buildings downtown. I've moved things in and out of there." He glanced up. I'm not going to do anything with that information. I just thought it was better to say I know than to pretend I don't." She studied him. "You could have said something earlier. You weren't ready to be recognized earlier." That was accurate enough that she had no response to it. She picked her fork back up. "My former CFO, had been running a parallel board campaign for 18 months. He had 3 of the 7 board members, enough to push through a shareholder rights amendment that gave the board authority to impose a forced leave of absence for the CEO pending a governance review." She said it the way she said everything in meetings, flat, precise, no inflection. The apartment was part of a lease structure tied to a corporate entity he controlled as a subsidiary arrangement. When the leave was imposed, the lease was terminated, effective immediately. She paused. "I had 4 hours' notice." Liam was quiet for a moment. "And they changed the locks. At 8:15 this evening, your legal team is filing an injunction tomorrow morning." She looked at the window. Snow against the glass. Tonight, however, he nodded. He didn't say, "That's terrible," or "I'm so sorry," or any of the things people said when they wanted to perform sympathy without feeling it. He just nodded, like he was integrating the information and deciding what was actually useful. "The governance review," he said. "Is it substantive or is it a mechanism?" She looked at him sharply. "Because if it's a mechanism," he continued, "they need it to drag. If it's substantive, they'd want it quick to minimize uncertainty for shareholders." "What's their current timeline?" 60 days, she said slowly. "They've structured it as a 60-day independent review, long enough to be painful, short enough to not spook institutional investors." He was quiet again. "And they're pushing it in Q4. So their goal isn't actually your removal, it's your compliance." He picked up his fork. "They need something from you. Something you haven't given them." Isabella sat very still. She had spent the last 6 weeks in meetings with attorneys and board advisors and a crisis management firm at $900 an hour. None of them had said it that plainly. "The Meridian acquisition," she said. "They want me to approve a structure I've been blocking for 8 months. He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Who are you?" she said. He looked up. The question had come out differently than she intended, not hostile, not sharp, just genuinely bewildered. "Liam Carter," he said. "I work logistics. I have a daughter who likes green horses." He stood up and took both plates to the sink. "You should sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. She watched him rinse the plates. His movements at the sink had the same economy as everything else. He did efficient, practiced, no wasted motion. He'd done this 10,000 times, and he would do it 10,000 more, and it did not occur to him to make it mean anything other than what it was. She thought about the crisis firm, about the attorney who had sat across from her in a conference room on Tuesday morning and told her, with calibrated gravity, that the board's position was untenable and clearly improper, and that they were looking at a very winnable injunction. All of this was true. None of it had told her what was actually happening, the real game, the thing underneath the governance language and the legal mechanism. She had paid $900 an hour for technically correct analysis that had not yet explained the problem. This man, eating cold chicken at a small table in a small kitchen on the 6th floor of a building with a broken elevator, had explained it in 20 minutes. Liam. He turned off the tap. Why did you let me in? He was quiet for a moment. He dried his hands. He looked at her with the same straightforward attention he had used since the hallway, not appraising, not performing, just looking. Because it was cold, he said. And you were sitting on a floor. He went to the hall closet and got an extra blanket. He set it on the arm of the couch without comment. She didn't sleep for a while. She lay under the blue throw blanket and the extra one he'd added and listened to the wind against the windows and the radiator ticking its slow, domestic rhythm. Sophie's coloring page was still on the table. She could see it in the faint light from the kitchen. A green horse. A purple sky. Someone had left space for the sun, but hadn't drawn it yet. The storm had passed by 5. Isabella woke to the sound of Liam in the kitchen at 6, quiet. Methodical, the careful quiet of someone trying not to wake others. She lay still for a moment and watched the ceiling, pale in early light. The city outside was muffled, white, new-looking. She had slept 6 hours without a single alarm. That had not happened in approximately 3 years. She sat up. Her hair was a catastrophe and her suit jacket had creased in a way that would horrify her assistant. And she felt, underneath all of it, something she couldn't immediately name. Not rested, exactly. Not restored. But quiet, like the storm had taken something with it when it left. Liam was making oatmeal. He glanced over when she came into the kitchen. "Coffee's ready," he said. She poured herself a cup and stood at the counter. He was cutting fruit, an apple, a banana with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. Sophie appeared at 7, still in the rabbit pajamas, ate breakfast while showing Isabella a drawing she had made the previous week of what appeared to be a dragon with excellent posture. "He's very dignified," Isabella told her. Sophie was satisfied with this. A car arrived at 7:45. Her general counsel, Marcus Webb, in the back seat with 2 associates, all 3 of them looking as if they had slept approximately as much as she had not. She stood at the window and watched it idle at the curb. She turned around. Liam was at the sink, rinsing the breakfast dishes. Sophie had gone to get dressed, her small feet thundering down the hallway with inexplicable urgency. The apartment looked exactly as it had last night, small, warm, mismatched, full of books and a half-colored page and a fish named Bubbles visible in a tank on the bookshelf. "Thank you," she said. He turned off the tap, looked at her. "The injunction will go through. You'll have the building back by end of week. Probably. Don't approve the meridian structure." She studied him. "You know what the meridian acquisition is?" "I know what it does at the structural level you described. Whoever takes that position becomes dependent on the counterparty's continued goodwill. That's not an acquisition. That's leverage." He dried his hands on a dish towel. "You already knew that." "Yes," she said. "So trust what you know." The car honked. Once. She picked up her bags. Liam had brought them in from the hallway the previous night, she realized, while she was sleeping. She hadn't noticed. She stood at the door. "Maybe you should come back to wherever you belong," he said quietly. Not unkindly. She nodded once and left. The injunction was filed at 9 and granted at 2. She was back in the penthouse by Thursday evening. Her assistant had supervised a full replacement of the lock system, arranged for her personal files to be audited for tampering, and ordered Thai food, which sat untouched on the kitchen counter, while Isabella stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking at the city 43 floors below. Snow on every rooftop. The streets moving again now, slow and methodical, the way Chicago always recovered not quickly, but reliably. She had an emergency board meeting Friday morning. She spent Thursday night preparing, the way she always prepared alone. Thorough, without witnesses. Reviewing financials, reviewing the Meridian term sheet again, reviewing her CFO's communications that her legal team had now pulled together into a timeline of the campaign against her. 18 months. He had been patient. She gave him that. 18 months of quiet alignment, of carefully placed doubts, of a governance architecture built incrementally in the spaces she hadn't been watching closely enough. She knew what she should feel about that. Anger, probably. The clean, productive kind she had learned to use as fuel. Instead, she felt something flatter, the exhaustion of having been right about him for years and talked herself out of it because the alternative was too disruptive to address. She should have addressed it. She had known what kind of man he was in her second year of working with him, when she'd watched him take credit for a junior analyst's financial model in a presentation to institutional investors and then, afterward, tell the analyst privately that she should have spoken up if she wanted recognition. The particular psychology of it, the taking and the deflection, the way he managed both simultaneously without apparent discomfort had registered clearly. She had filed it and moved on because he was effective, and she needed effective, and she had been wrong to do that. She would not make that particular mistake again. But at 10:30, she found herself staring at a logistics problem instead of the Meridian document. A distribution bottleneck her operations team had been arguing about for 2 months. A conflict between their current warehousing contracts and the new fulfillment timeline she'd approved in October. 2 competing solutions, both technically defensible, neither obviously superior. Her operations VP had escalated it 3 times, and each time she'd sent it back with notes, and each time the same 2 camps had held their positions, and the actual decision had not been made. She thought about what Liam had said. What do they actually need from you? Not what the logistics vendors were saying they needed. Not what the operations team was asking for. What did the system actually need? If you stripped out the institutional inertia and the territorial concerns and the sunk cost of each camp's previous position, what was the real constraint? She pulled up the contracts. She read them differently this time, not for what they said, but for what they were designed to do, the underlying logic of them, the actual pressure points, when each obligation triggered, what the counterparties were genuinely protected against versus what they had simply requested because it cost them nothing to ask. The system was not a logistics problem. The system was a negotiation that had been incorrectly categorized as a logistics problem, and that misframing was why 2 months of operations meetings had produced nothing. It took 20 minutes. The answer was not either of the 2 solutions her team had been debating. It was a third option. Simpler, that removed the conflict entirely by restructuring when certain obligations triggered, pushing one activation point back by 48 hours, which cost her nothing operationally, and eliminated the friction point completely. She sent the memo to her COO at 11. She sat with it for a moment after she sent it. "I just solve problems," he had said. And then he had refilled Sophie's mug of hot chocolate and asked no one for anything in return, which was either the most disarming thing she had seen in years or the most quietly devastating, and she had not yet decided which. She opened a new search window, typed, "Liam Carter, Chicago, Logistics." It took her research team 2 days, which was a sign of either how careful he was or how genuinely unremarkable his public footprint was. What they found was this: Liam Carter, 36, graduated top of his class at the University of Illinois with a degree in operations research, a field that was, essentially, the applied mathematics of making complex systems work efficiently, had been accepted into a joint MBA engineering program at Northwestern. Started in September. Left in March of the following year. The gap was not hard to find. His daughter's birth certificate was public record. Sophie Carter, born February. Father, Liam James Carter. Mother, Rebecca Ann Carter, née Hoffman. Rebecca Carter had died 14 months later, an aneurysm, 31 years old. No warning, no time. After that, nothing prestigious. Nothing that matched the degree or the program. Logistics coordinator for a mid-sized shipping company. Operations supervisor. His current position at Hartley Distribution, a contract logistics firm that did work for, among others, several buildings in the downtown corridor. No executive titles. No conference appearances. No thought leadership articles. Just someone who had stepped off a path to take care of someone else. She sat with the file for a long time. She thought about the way he had listened to her describe the board campaign, and immediately identified the actual leverage point. Not the governance review, not the legal mechanism, but the underlying negotiation. She thought about the Meridian question, how he had named what it was in one sentence. She thought about Sophie eating oatmeal and showing a stranger her drawing of a dignified dragon. She picked up her phone and called her COO. "The memo I sent last night," she said. "We're reviewing it," Patricia said. "Honestly, Isabella, it's where did this come from? Someone I know. It's elegant. It's genuinely elegant. How did we not see this for 2 months? Because you were solving the wrong problem." She paused. "Patricia, if I brought someone in as a strategic operations consultant for a quarter no title yet, just consultant, could you keep it quiet? A beat." "How quiet?" "Very. I can do that." She hung up. She looked at the city. She thought about what it cost him to leave Northwestern, about the math of that, the future value of a completed MBA, the compounding of career trajectory, the doors that don't open, the ones that stay shut, the calculation most people made, and the one he had made instead. She called the number her research team had found. It rang 4 times. "Carter, it's Isabella Laurent," she said. "I'd like to talk to you." A pause. "I figured you might." They met on a Sunday, at a coffee shop 12 blocks from his apartment. Not one of the places she normally went, not a hotel lobby or a private dining room, or any of the environments she used to signal the nature of a meeting. Just a coffee shop with mismatched chairs and a blackboard menu and a draft from the door every time someone came in. She was already there when he arrived, which had been intentional. She wanted to see him in daylight, in neutral territory, without the context of a snowstorm and emergency kindness distorting either of their judgments. He wore a flannel over a dark Henley, a coat that had seen several winters, boots with dried salt on the leather. He ordered a black coffee and sat down across from her and didn't ask how she was doing, which she appreciated. "The Meridian board session was Friday," she said. "I heard it went well. For you." They backed down from the governance review. The CFO resigned. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "I blocked the acquisition structure, presented an alternative that addressed the underlying asset play they were actually after without the dependency mechanism. They didn't love it, but they couldn't argue with the math." He nodded. "The operations memo I sent Thursday night is saving us approximately $3 million annually in contracted warehouse fees," she continued. "My COO called it elegant. The insight came from talking to you. You did the work. The framework was yours." She looked at him directly. "I want you to come work for me." He looked at his coffee. "As what?" "To start as a strategic operations consultant. 90-day engagement, no title, no announcement. You review our systems. You tell me what you see." She paused. "The compensation would be..." "Isabella." She stopped. "Before you tell me the number," he said, "I need to tell you something." He looked up. His expression was level, careful. "I have a daughter who needs consistency. I have a routine that works imperfectly, but it works. I have a job where I know what's expected and I can plan around it." He turned his cup slowly on the table. "Whatever you're offering the money, the title, whatever it becomes, I'm not interested in trading stability for it. Sophie's already lost one parent. She's not losing the other one to a career." Isabella was quiet. "I'm not saying no," he said. "I'm saying that before I say yes, I need to know what yes actually means, what the hours look like, what happens when she's sick and I need to leave a meeting, whether the people around you understand that sometimes I'm going to leave at 5:30 and that's not negotiable." "That's a reasonable set of conditions," she said. "It's non-negotiable," he said. "Not aggressive, just clear. I understood the first time." She looked at him. The consulting engagement would be project-based. "You set your schedule. I need results, not hours. If Sophie is sick, you handle Sophie." She paused. "If I'm honest, the operations infrastructure at Laurent Capital has been running on systems that were adequate 4 years ago and are now inadequate. I need someone who can look at how things actually work, not how they're supposed to work on paper. That's a 3-month project. After that, we talk about what comes next. Or we don't." He was quiet. "I read your file," she said. "Northwestern." Something shifted in his face. Not quite closed, but more careful. "That was a long time ago," he said. "I know what it cost you." "You don't," he said quietly. "Not really." But he looked at the window. At the street outside, gray and cold and ordinary. "It's not a thing I regret. I want to be clear about that. I regret the version of the future that didn't happen. I don't regret why it didn't happen." She nodded. "I'll think about it," he said. "I need to talk to Sophie. She's 8. She's 8, and she's going to have opinions." He stood, picked up his coat. "I'll call you by Wednesday." He called Tuesday morning. The first 3 weeks were the hardest. Not because of the work itself. Liam moved through the Laurent Capital operations infrastructure. The way a doctor moves through a patient history, methodical and without assumptions, looking for what was actually there rather than what the chart said. He sat with warehouse managers and accounts payable teams, and the people who ran the automated systems nobody upstairs fully understood anymore. He asked questions. He took notes on paper, which made Patricia Nguyen, the COO, look at him sideways. "He takes notes on paper," she told Isabella. "I know. He doesn't trust digital notes not to be seen by the wrong people," Isabella said. "In an environment where we just had an internal governance campaign run for 18 months without anyone catching it, that's actually the correct instinct." Patricia paused. "Fair. The hard part was the people. Not Liam and the operations teams, they got along fine, with the uncomplicated respect of people who understood the same kind of work. The hard part was the senior leadership tier, the managing directors and VPs and executive committee members who were accustomed to consultants coming in with polished decks and executive presence and business school cadences. Liam had none of those things. He showed up in the same 2 or 3 flannels, took his paper notes, and said things like, "The actual problem isn't the system, it's the incentive structure upstream of the system," and several of them found this either threatening or vaguely irritating. Isabella addressed it once, in a closed executive meeting, and only once. "Mr. Carter has identified 3 operational inefficiencies in the first 2 weeks that our previous consulting firm missed across an 8-month engagement," she said. "If his flannel is distracting you from that, I suggest redirecting your focus." The room was quiet after that. He found the first major problem in week 2, a reporting lag between their risk assessment function and their trading operations desk that created an 18 to 24-hour gap in actionable information during volatile market periods. Not a technology problem, a human process problem specifically. 2 teams that had been restructured during the pandemic and had never been told their new reporting lines no longer made communication between them efficient. "They think the other team is upstream," he told her. "They're both waiting. For how long? Based on the documentation I can see?" "About 14 months. She closed her eyes briefly. "There's no blame here," he said. "The restructure was fast, and the communication about it was incomplete. But you've been running with this gap for over a year, during which time," he turned to a page of his notes, "I counted 7 instances of delayed response in volatile periods that cost between roughly 30 and 80 basis points each." He left the notes with her and picked up his jacket. "Sophie has a parent-teacher thing tonight. I'll be back tomorrow at 8. She looked at the notes after he left. His handwriting was precise. Every number cited, every assumption flagged, every inference labeled as inference rather than fact. The logic was structured like code, or like something closer to a proof than a business memo. Each page had a margin column where he'd written questions rather than conclusions. Not "this is broken," but "why does this exist in this form?" What was it solving when it was built? She had paid a consulting firm $450,000 over 8 months. They had produced a 200-slide deck with 17 recommendations, none of which had been implemented because none of them accounted for why the existing systems existed in the form they did. They had solved a diagrammatic version of the company rather than the actual one. Liam Carter had been here 3 weeks, and she already had actionable findings with clear causality. She was also, she noticed, looking forward to 8 o'clock tomorrow morning in a way she could not fully explain as professional. She called her COO. "The reporting lag between risk and trading ops," she said. "I want a process correction memo drafted by Monday. No blame language. Frame it as a structural gap from the 2020 restructure." "Done," Patricia said. Also, a pause. "I ran the rough numbers on the basis point losses from the 7 instances he cited. It's closer to 140 basis points total. Across 14 months. "I know. Where did you find him?" Isabella looked at the window. "At 43 floors of City. He found me," she said. She thought about the Northwestern program he had left. About the 8 years since, the career trajectory interrupted, the expertise built in the margins of everything else. There was a particular kind of intelligence that developed outside institutions, less polished, more durable. It didn't know the correct vocabulary for describing what it saw, so it described it directly instead. It hadn't been trained to frame problems in ways that protected the framer. She thought about what it meant that this was where he'd ended up, not diminished, not bitter, just present. Doing the work in front of him. Taking care of what was his. She found that profoundly, unexpectedly difficult to think about clearly, so she stopped trying to think about it clearly and simply let it be what it was. A man who had come into her life through a snowstorm and an act of ordinary decency, and who had, without seeming to intend it, made her look at her own company and her own habits and her own long-practiced distance from other people with more honest eyes than she had used in years. The 90-day engagement became complicated around day 50. It was not one event. It was an accumulation, a pattern she noticed in herself before she named it. The way she always noticed things before she was willing to say what they were. She had started adjusting her schedule. Not dramatically. Not in ways her assistant could point to. But she found reasons for morning meetings that happened to start before Liam arrived rather than after. She took calls in her office that she might have otherwise taken in the common area. She sent notes through Patricia rather than directly. She was creating distance. She knew why. She didn't want to know why. On day 53, he appeared in her office doorway at 4:30. She had been expecting him to leave early. Sophie had a school concert, a thing he had mentioned to Patricia on Monday. "Concerts at 7, he said, answering the question she hadn't asked. "I have time." He came in and sat down without being invited, which he had started doing somewhere around week 3 and which she had never addressed. "You've been running through Patricia for 2 weeks. She set down her pen. "I've been busy." He looked at her. "Don't do that," she said. "Do what?" "The thing where you just look at me and wait for the honest version." "That's just listening," he said. "It's very pointed listening." He was quiet. The light outside was already going winter afternoons in Chicago. 4:30 felt like evening, the sky turning that particular shade of pewter that she had always associated with endings. "You're good at distance," he said finally. "Not accusatory, observational. I'm good at a lot of things. This one's a defense mechanism." She stood up, went to the window. The city below, traffic lights blinking red and green, people moving in small, determined clusters against the cold. "I don't think that's within the scope of your operational review." "Probably not." A pause. "But I'm not asking as a consultant." She turned around. He was looking at her steadily, the way he had looked at her in the hallway the first night, not assuming anything, not performing anything, just paying attention. "I have a company to run," she said. "I have 43 people on my executive team and 312 employees and institutional investors and a board that spent 18 months trying to remove me. I don't have room." She stopped. "I'm not asking for room," he said. "I'm asking you to stop pretending you don't know what's happening." The radiator in her office ticked. Outside, a gust hit the windows. She had been, for as long as she could clearly remember, very good at this, at the particular efficiency of not needing things. She had built the skill deliberately, early, after a period in her 20s when she had made the mistake of structuring her life around a person who had then left it, cleanly, without much difficulty. She had learned from that. She had built systems instead, routines, protocols. The clean architecture of a life organized around goals rather than people. It had worked exceptionally well. The inconvenient truth was that it had stopped working sometime in the past 7 weeks, and she knew exactly when and why, and she was not ready to say it. "Sophie asked about you," he said quietly. "Last week, she wanted to know if you'd seen Bubbles since that night. I told her you'd been busy." Something tightened in her chest. "She's 8. She's a good judge of character." He stood, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "The concert's at 7. You should come." She stared at him. "Not as anything," he said. "As someone who knows us. That's already what you are." He looked at her once more. "The building your office is in has a decent florist on the 2nd floor. Sophie thinks flowers at concerts are important. She saw it in a movie." He left. She looked at his empty chair for a long moment. At the window behind it, the city dark and lit and continuous. She thought, "I've managed acquisitions worth 9 figures. I've sat across from men who were trying to dismantle everything I'd built, and I did not flinch." She thought. "A 8-year-old asked about me." She picked up her coat. The concert was in the gymnasium of a public elementary school 20 minutes from the office. Folding chairs, a paper banner above the stage that read "Winter Showcase" in letters of uneven height, a sound system that had seen better decades. Parents in work clothes still carrying their commute messenger bags, lanyards. The look of people who had come straight from something else. Children in the front rows in various states of formal dress, some in Christmas sweaters, some in what appeared to be their best soccer uniforms. Sophie was in the 2nd row, in a navy dress and the kind of expression that meant she had been practicing very hard and was also terrified. She spotted Isabella from the stage. Her eyes went wide for a moment. Then she smiled quickly, briefly, and looked back at the conductor. Liam was standing at the side of the gym. He hadn't taken one of the folding chairs. He was leaning against the wall with his coat still on, the way someone stands when they're ready to leave fast if they need to. A habit of single parenthood. Isabella stood beside him. "You came," he said. She handed him the flowers, sunflowers, yellow against the institutional gray of the gymnasium. Wildly incongruous and exactly right. He looked at them for a moment. He looked at her. "I usually stand here," he said, "in case she needs to see me." "I know." The concert began. 32 children playing recorders and violins, and in one case what appeared to be a ukulele, a sound that was sincere and imprecise and absolutely full of effort. Sophie played violin. She played it with her whole body, with the kind of focused intensity that was entirely familiar to Isabella. the look of someone who has decided that this, here, now, is the only thing that matters. She was, objectively, not yet very good. She was wonderful. Isabella stood beside Liam in the fluorescent gymnasium and did not look at her phone once. This was not a small thing. She had not sat through an uninterrupted 40 minutes in public without checking something since approximately 2019. But the children were playing, and Sophie's face was visible from the side of the stage, that expression of ferocious, terrified concentration, and something about it made the phone feel not just unnecessary but actually wrong, like a noise in a room that should be quiet. Beside her, Liam watched his daughter. She had seen him in a great many settings by now. In her office, in conference rooms, on warehouse floors, and in server rooms, and in the back of a car going through financials on a tablet at 6 in the morning. She had seen him calm under pressure and patient under condescension, and quietly, thoroughly effective in every environment that had tried to diminish him. She had never seen him look the way he looked right now. It was not a performance. There was no audience for it except her, and she did not think he had registered that she was watching. He just stood with the sunflowers at his side and looked at his daughter on that gymnasium stage with an expression so simple and undefended that it was almost difficult to witness directly the way certain kinds of light are. This, she thought, was what love looked like when it had no audience and no agenda, when it was simply a fact of a person's existence, as fundamental as the way he breathed. She looked at the stage. At Sophie, bow moving, brow furrowed, mouth set. She thought about all the things she had been very good at building. Companies, strategies, frameworks, contingency plans, the architecture of a life designed to require nothing it could not provide for itself. She had been so efficient about it. She had been so lonely. The music ended in a small, scattered chord, not quite together, but close enough, and the gymnasium filled with that particular applause parents give their children. Too loud, entirely genuine, carrying years of dropped-off mornings and packed lunches and bedtime stories and ordinary Tuesday evenings stacked invisibly beneath it. Liam clapped. He put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled, which was not a thing Isabella had ever witnessed an adult do unself-consciously in an indoor space, and it was so entirely characteristic of him that she laughed, actually laughed, a short burst of it that she hadn't planned. He looked at her sideways. Something in his expression settled quietly. At the end, Sophie ran to them with the specific kinetic energy of a child who has been sitting still for 40 minutes and can no longer contain it. She looked at the sunflowers. Her face went through approximately 4 emotions in 2 seconds. "They're from me," Isabella said. Sophie looked at her father. Back at Isabella. With great solemnity, she took the flowers and pressed them against her chest. "I knew you would come," she said. "I told Bubbles." 3 months later, the consulting engagement ended. In its place, a newly created position, Senior Director of Operational Strategy, reporting directly to the CEO. It had taken Isabella 4 weeks to structure it correctly, not to dress it up, but to strip it down to what it actually was. A role that could be done well by someone with Liam's specific way of thinking without requiring him to become someone else to do it. She had written the job description herself. He read it in her office on a Wednesday afternoon. Sophie in an after-school program for another 2 hours. He read it twice, the way he read everything with full attention, from the beginning. He put it down. "You structured the hours as deliverable-based," he said. "No core hours requirement. This includes a provision about he looked at the page. Parental obligations and family commitments as a recognized scheduling priority. They are a recognized scheduling priority." He was quiet for a moment. "Isabella, this is a good job." He looked up. "I know. I'm not taking it because of," he gestured, briefly, at the space between them. "I know that too," she said. "That's why I'm offering it." He looked at the job description again. Outside, the light was going still early, still winter, though the snow had retreated and the days were stretching now by minutes. Incrementally, the way change always happened when it was real. "Okay," he said. That was all. The first board meeting with Liam in the room as a member of the operational leadership team was in late March. He wore a jacket. Not a suit, a dark jacket over a button-down, which was, she suspected, a concession he had made to the room rather than to her, because he was practical about these things and understood that certain environments had certain taxes and he was willing to pay the reasonable ones. He had not, she noticed, bought a new briefcase. He came in with the same worn leather bag he always carried, which contained a legal pad and 2 pens and, she was fairly certain, a granola bar for emergencies. He presented the restructured reporting framework, clear, spare, 20 slides that said exactly what they needed to say and nothing else. No decorative charts, no executive summary that repeated itself 3 times in different fonts, none of the visual scaffolding that consultants used to make work look like more work than it was. Just the system, how it was broken, how it would be fixed, and the projected impact of fixing it. He fielded questions from the managing directors with the same steadiness he brought to everything, the quality of someone who had made his decision before walking in the door and therefore had nothing to prove to anyone in the room. When Clark Whitfield pushed back on the timeline for the risk desk restructure, Liam looked at him for a moment and said, quietly, "The timeline is conservative because I built in 2 weeks for the resistance. If you want to move faster, I need to know the resistance won't materialize." The room went very still. Clark Whitfield said he would ensure it would not. Isabella watched all of this from the head of the table and did not speak unless asked a direct question. Afterward, Patricia found her in the hallway. "He's real," Patricia said. "I know. I mean, she searched for the word. He's actually real. He's not performing anything. He doesn't want anything except for the work to be good." "I know." Patricia looked at her for a moment. "You look different." "I look the same." "You look," Patricia considered, "like you slept." Isabella thought about a couch with a blue throw blanket, about mini marshmallows, about a child asking if she wanted hot chocolate in the middle of a disaster, with the complete sincerity of someone who had not yet learned to expect the worst from people. "I did," she said. "I slept." She walked back to her office. The city was visible through every window, 43 floors of it, the lake gray-blue in the distance, traffic below moving in its slow arterial pulse. She had stood at this window 1,000 times with the feeling of managing something vast and unsteady, the particular vertigo of being responsible for something larger than herself and not entirely certain she was enough for it. Today, the feeling was different, not smaller, not simpler, just steadier, like something that had been slightly off-axis had been corrected, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the incremental, trustworthy way that real corrections happened. She sat down at her desk. There was a drawing on the corner of it. Sophie had sent it last week, via Liam's internal messenger, with a subject line that said, "This is official work mail." A horse, green, under a purple sky. In the corner, small and careful, a yellow sun. She had finally drawn it in. Isabella looked at it for a long moment. She thought about a hallway in a snowstorm, about cold air and a paper bag and a man who had not asked her a single question about who she was before deciding she was worth helping. She thought about all the ways she had tried to be sufficient to herself, and how well that had worked, and what it had cost her, quietly. Over time, the accumulated interest of a life that had been very full and not, until recently, particularly warm. She opened her files and got to work. The yellow sun stayed on the corner of the desk. It stayed there all winter and into spring, and past it. Sometimes the person who changes everything doesn't arrive with credentials or a pitch or anything to prove. Sometimes they're just standing in a cold hallway, holding a paper bag, deciding whether to open a door. Liam Carter opened the door. The rest followed.